Ukraine defeated Russia's Black Sea fleet without a single ship. No destroyers, no submarines, no navy. And yet, by mid-2025, nearly 40% of Russia's warships and submarines had been destroyed or disabled, including its prized flagship. The most dominant naval force in the region was driven back not just to Crimea, but beyond it. So let's break down how Ukraine pulled off the most dramatic naval upset in modern history. In the war's early months, Russia's blockade was devastating Ukraine's economy. Ukraine is one of the world's largest grain exporters, shipping wheat and corn to NATO countries and beyond, including over $2 billion worth of grain to China alone each year. In March 2022, Ukrainian exports plummeted by nearly 50%. By December that year, they were still down almost 49% compared to pre-war levels. Russia's strategy was simple: strangle Ukraine economically while its ground forces advanced from the east. Without maritime exports, Ukraine would run out of money to fund its defense. But by autumn 2023, something remarkable happened. Ukraine exported 55 million tons of cargo through the Black Sea. By the end of 2024, that number had nearly doubled to 88 million tons, and in January 2025, practically went back to the pre-war levels and has stabilized ever since. It's one of the most successful blockade-breaking operations in modern history, and it wasn't accomplished by building a traditional navy. Ukraine achieved this through a combination of innovation, desperation, and Western support that fundamentally changed how naval warfare works. The first layer of defense was old-fashioned: mines and coastal missiles. Ukraine strategically deployed hundreds of Soviet-era naval mines along likely invasion points. The exact numbers remain classified, but these mines created exclusion zones that Russian ships couldn't safely navigate. Russia responded by laying their own mines, supposedly to prevent trade from Odessa, though both sides accused each other of deliberately releasing mines into international waters. Regardless of who deployed what, Ukraine managed to block off vital sections of its coastline from Russian surface vessels. For longer-range threats, Ukraine leveraged the newly re-engineered RK-360 MC Neptune coastal defense system. The R-360 Neptune missile has an extended range, allowing Ukraine to potentially strike targets across the entire Black Sea. Combined with short-range coastal artillery, effective within dozens of miles offshore, Ukraine created what military planners call a defensive triangle: mines, artillery, and missiles working in concert. But these defensive capabilities pale in comparison to what came next. Ukraine developed unmanned naval drones, which were hailed as one of the quickest military innovations in modern history, with devastating practical applications. The Magura V5 became Ukraine's precision ship killer. This small, vessel-shaped drone has a range of up to 500 miles with 60 hours of battery life, giving it excellent roaming and loitering capability. It cruises at speeds around 22 knots or 25 miles per hour. But most importantly, it could carry a 440-pound explosive payload, which would detonate when the Magura V5 approaches or rams an enemy vessel. Furthermore, the drone streams live video to operators hundreds of miles away, meaning it can conduct both offensive strikes and pure surveillance missions. As one Ukrainian military intelligence commander explained, "We didn't try to strengthen the warhead to destroy a ship with one hit. We took another approach. We attacked in a swarm, carrying out 5 or more hits on large ships to cause critical damage." Think of it as the naval equivalent of quadcopter drones that now dominate land warfare, except with 20 times the range. While the Magura V5 serves as the all-rounder, the Sea Baby drone functions as heavy artillery. The latest Sea Baby model carries 1,900 pounds of explosives, hits a top speed of 56 miles per hour, and covers distances up to 620 miles. That's nearly 4 times the explosive payload of a Magura V5, designed specifically for devastating static targets like dock ships or shipbuilding infrastructure. In June 2024, Ukraine also revealed the Stalker 5.0, essentially a smaller, stealthier version of the Magura V5 built primarily for naval transport but retrofittable with 300 pounds of explosives when needed. These are more than mere remote-controlled boats. They're intelligent weapon systems with thermal imaging and electronic warfare capabilities that give Ukrainian operators enormous advantages over Russian visual detection systems. Russian crews are forced to fire blindly into dark water at targets they can barely see, while Ukrainian operators watch high-definition video feeds from hundreds of miles away. Then, Ukraine rewrote the playbook again. At the end of 2024, a Magura V5 destroyed a Russian Mi-8 helicopter and damaged 2 others in 3 separate attacks. This was the first reported use of an air-to-air missile launched from an unmanned maritime craft. The missile used a Vimpel R-73, codename AA-11 Archer by NATO, normally used on MiG and Sukhoi fighter jets. By adapting the jet launcher to a boat drone, Ukraine could now use leftover Soviet aircraft missiles to threaten Russian aircraft far from Ukrainian airspace, without deploying its own precious fighter jets needed for air defense. But helicopters weren't enough. In May 2025, around 30 miles west of Novorossiysk, modified Magura V5s reportedly shot down 2 Russian Su-30SM fighter jets using AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles. Let that sink in. $50 million fighter jets destroyed by drone boats. The Security Service of Ukraine unveiled an updated Sea Baby in October 2025, emphasizing its multi-purpose platform capabilities. Upgraded communication systems relying on Starlink with multiple backups provide redundancy and reliability, allowing Sea Baby to deploy explosives or carry missiles close to Russian ports. Furthermore, the newest model has implemented AI for targeting and navigation, as well as increasing its operating range to over 930 miles and its carrying capacity to 4,400 pounds. This allows it to carry explosives, mines, and even dedicated anti-air turrets, machine guns, or missile launchers. When we combine defensive capabilities, defensive mines and missiles, and Ukraine's innovative drone swarms, the country achieved something remarkable. It restored maritime trade while simultaneously destroying Russia's ability to project naval power. Every successful grain shipment funded more drone production, which enabled more attacks on Russian ships, which further secured the shipping lanes. Russia's blockade strategy backfired spectacularly, becoming a catalyst for Ukrainian innovation rather than economic surrender. But Ukraine's naval revolution extends beyond just sinking ships. Their long-range strike capabilities have fundamentally altered the strategic balance across the entire Black Sea region. Nowhere is this more evident than in Crimea. In June 2025, Ukraine launched its third major attack on the Kerch Bridge, the vital connection linking Crimea to mainland Russia. Ukrainian intelligence reported planting over 2,000 pounds of explosives at the bridge's base. The Kerch Bridge is Putin's pet project, symbolizing his objective to permanently bind the Ukrainian peninsula to Russia. More practically, it serves as one of the primary supply lines for Russian troops operating in southern Ukraine. The bridge's vulnerability forces Russia into an impossible choice: defend every meter of this exposed structure, or rely on slower, riskier overland supply lines through occupied Donbass, which are constantly under Ukrainian long-range attack. But the real strategic goal involves Sevastopol itself. Sevastopol has been the headquarters of Russia's Black Sea Fleet since imperial times. When the Soviet Union collapsed, the HQ moved to Novorossiysk, but Russia paid Ukraine to continue porting ships in Sevastopol. After Crimea's annexation in 2014, Sevastopol once again became the center of Russian naval operations. And with centuries of development, established supply lines, and defensive infrastructure, Sevastopol provided Russia with optimal positioning to control the western Black Sea and threaten Ukrainian coastal operations. Ukraine's long-range drones like Magura V5s and the Sea Baby put every ship and building in Sevastopol at risk. This forced Russian vessels to retreat to ports like Novorossiysk, Temruk, and Taganrog, over 300 miles from the Ukrainian coast. Black Sky Intelligence Service provided detailed satellite imagery showing ruined buildings and empty docks in Sevastopol, with AI-enhanced analysis suggesting an 18% drop in ships detected between 2022 and 2024. This geographical displacement fundamentally degrades Russian capabilities. Operating from Novorossiysk instead of Sevastopol increases fuel consumption, reduces patrol time near Ukrainian waters, and complicates logistical support. Ships spending more time in transit have less time for operational missions. By spring 2024, Britain's Defence Ministry declared the Russian Black Sea Fleet functionally inactive. Not damaged, not reduced, functionally inactive. Ukraine made one of the world's largest navies, or at least a part of it, strategically irrelevant. And this has repercussions far beyond simple trade. Every strike on Crimean infrastructure severs one of Russia's most important logistics channels to southern Ukraine. The Kerch Bridge is effectively one of the only reliable connections the Crimean Peninsula has to mainland Russia, discounting the occupied parts of Donbass that remain under constant Ukrainian bombardment. Without secure supply lines through Crimea, Russian forces operating in Kherson and Zaporizhia Oblast face exponentially greater logistical challenges. Every missile, every tank round, every meal for Russian troops become harder to deliver. This strategic squeeze explains why Ukraine continues targeting Crimean infrastructure, despite the attack's technical difficulty and the international attention they generate. And Ukraine's long-range capabilities extend beyond Crimea into Russia's native territory, as Ukrainian forces have struck native Russian ports on the Black Sea coast, including reported hits on submarines at Novorossiysk. In December 2025, Ukraine claimed it hit a Kilo-class submarine with an underwater drone in what would be the first time an underwater drone destroyed a submarine. Satellite imagery from Van Tor showed damage to the port's key section, though Russia denied that any submarine was damaged. Whether that specific attack succeeded or not, the strategic implications are clear. Russia's submarines, supposedly safe in their home ports, are now vulnerable to attack. This matters because Russia's submarine arsenal remains one of the country's most important force projection tools, especially regarding NATO. Russia operates 8 Borei-class nuclear ballistic missile submarines, each carrying 16 nuclear missiles, forming a crucial part of Russia's nuclear deterrent. 3 additional Yasin-class attack submarines provide tactical flexibility with cruise missiles and anti-ship capabilities. The US Office of Naval Intelligence considers the Yasin class the least detectable of Russian and Chinese nuclear submarines, making them genuine threats to NATO naval operations. But here's the paradox. Russia hasn't used its submarines to great effect in this war. The reasoning is simple. Russia is attacking a nation with no notable sea-based assets. Ukraine has no destroyers to hunt, no carrier groups to threaten, no maritime supply convoys to interdict. The Black Sea itself also isn't particularly suitable for deep-sea submarine operations. It's relatively shallow compared to oceanic waters, and the narrow Turkish Straits create choke points that make submarine movements detectable. Most importantly, a nuclear-armed submarine won't actually launch nuclear weapons against Ukraine. Putin is well aware that firing nuclear missiles at a non-nuclear nation would trigger an immediate NATO nuclear response, spelling doom in the subsequent nuclear war. So, Russia's most powerful naval assets sit idle or conduct limited cruise missile strikes. They could accomplish just as easily from surface ships or ground-based launchers. The submarines represent deterrence against NATO intervention, not practical tools for conquering Ukraine. It's a fundamental mismatch between Russia's naval capabilities and the actual requirements of this war. They built a navy to counter NATO carrier strike groups, not to support a land invasion of a neighbouring country. And the submarine situation exemplifies a broader problem: Russia's inability to maintain and modernise its naval forces. Russia once possessed multiple aircraft carriers. Most were ultimately sold to other countries, with China and India buying decommissioned Russian carriers to jumpstart their own programs. Only one remained, the Admiral Kuznetsov. The Kuznetsov was supposed to be Russia's prestige platform, proof that Russia remained a global naval power. But in July 2025, reports suggested Russia might actually scrap its only aircraft carrier rather than complete its modernization. Let that sink in for a moment. Russia would abandon its sole carrier, reducing its carrier fleet to zero. The Kuznetsov entered service in 1991 and has been out of action since 2017, undergoing repairs that never seemed to finish. The ship originally entered a brief overhaul period after deployment off Syria, but accidents, delays, and cost overruns have kept it docked ever since. According to one analysis, the current physical state of the ship is reportedly dire, but the real problem runs deeper than hull maintenance. Over 8 years out of service has allowed the human capital of Russian naval aviation to wither. Without trained pilots and aircrew maintaining proficiency, carrier operations become effectively suicidal. Even if the Kuznetsov returned to service, reconstituting a functional air wing to stock it would take years. The only shortcut would be Russian pilots training on Chinese or Indian carriers, and there's no indication that's happening. This puts Russia severely behind maritime powers like the United States, with 11 nuclear carriers, but also France, Britain, and even China in terms of projecting air power at sea. And the scrapping would be a humiliating admission that Russia can no longer sustain even a single carrier. Of course, you could theorize that this is a strategic move, focusing Russian forces on defense where ground-based aircraft would theoretically suffice. But it more likely reveals the brutal truth. Russia no longer has aspirations of maintaining its status as a naval power following its monumental defeat in Ukraine. The rot extends throughout Russian naval infrastructure. According to the Jamestown Foundation, Russia's shipbuilding corporation recorded hundreds of millions of dollars in net losses despite billions in reported revenues. Russia is still attempting to modernize its fleet, spreading efforts across cruise missile upgrades and more efficient diesel engines. But these are countrywide efforts targeting Baltic and Pacific fleets, despite their having no relevance to the war in Ukraine. Ships that should be operational often sit in repair, lacking spare parts or suffering from substandard maintenance due to budget theft. Corruption siphons off procurement funds, while military planners coordinate operations with inventory that doesn't actually exist. Meanwhile, Russian contractors face centralized control, lengthy approval processes, and chronic underfunding that forces them to accept below-market payments. This creates a vicious cycle, where Russian military equipment barely works, often failing catastrophically at the worst possible moments. But Russia faces another fundamental problem beyond production capacity: geography. You see, Russia has not one but 4 separate major navies: Black Sea, Baltic, Northern, and Pacific. All these fleets have different home ports, which are practically isolated from one another. Russia has no way of transporting ships over land or sea between them, especially during open conflict. Turkey controls the straits connecting the Black Sea to the Mediterranean through the 1936 Montreux Convention. During wartime, Turkey can close these straits to outside warships, which includes Russian warships not native to the Black Sea fleet. This means Russia can't reinforce Black Sea losses with ships from other fleets. They can only draw from vessels whose home ports are designated on the Black Sea itself. Each part of Russia's navy is effectively stranded in its home port, unable to support operations elsewhere. On the west, Sweden and Finland's NATO membership means any attempt to leave the Baltic ports would face anti-ship missile batteries on Finnish and Estonian coasts, plus ultra-silent Swedish submarines lurking in the narrow Baltic waters. The Northern Fleet, based on the Kola Peninsula, operates in a completely different theatre, focused on Arctic operations and strategic submarine deterrence. Those assets can't help with Ukraine. The Pacific Fleet faces similar isolation, separated from European Russia by the entire Asian continent. This geographic fragmentation means Russia's on-paper strength of 80-plus Black Sea Fleet vessels at the war's start represents the entirety of naval power they could bring to bear. Losses won't be replaced from other fleets, only through new construction from shipyards that are failing. Compare this to NATO, where alliance members can coordinate and move naval assets globally. American carrier strike groups can deploy from Norfolk to the Mediterranean. French and British vessels can operate alongside one another seamlessly. Russia's navy exists in isolated pockets, each incapable of supporting the others, creating strategic vulnerabilities that Ukraine exploited brilliantly. So what does the future hold for Russia's navy? The brutal reality is that Russia's ground and air forces have been so spent in Ukraine that naval concerns barely register on Moscow's priority list. Naval modernization takes years and costs billions. Russia doesn't have years or billions to spare while fighting a grinding war of attrition in Ukraine. The most likely lifeline for maintaining any naval force may come from buying ships from China, a complete reversal of historical trends where China bought Russian military equipment. During the Cold War and the immediate post-Soviet period, Russia supplied China with fighters, submarines, and surface vessels. Now, China's shipbuilding industry dwarfs Russia's, and Chinese naval technology has surpassed Russian designs in many categories. If Russia becomes dependent on Chinese ships, that dependence extends beyond hardware to encompass Chinese domestic and foreign policy priorities. China could leverage naval sales to extract concessions on everything, from energy prices to territorial disputes to diplomatic support at the United Nations. This pattern has been established throughout the war. Russia imports Chinese electronics, machine tools, and dual-use technologies while exporting discounted oil and natural gas. The relationship grows increasingly asymmetric, with Russia as the junior partner dependent on Chinese goodwill. Naval dependence would cement this dynamic, transforming Russia from an independent naval power into a nation reliant on Chinese shipyards for its maritime future. But the implications of these events extend beyond Russia. Ukraine's naval revolution demonstrates that traditional naval power hierarchies are collapsing. Expensive warships designed to fight other warships suddenly become vulnerable to swarms of cheap drones costing a fraction of their price. Western militaries are paying attention. The lessons from Ukraine's David versus Goliath naval victory will reshape how every future maritime conflict gets fought. Sea drone tactics proven in the Black Sea could inform Taiwan's defense planning if China attempts an invasion. Dozens of underwater and surface drones waiting off the coast could devastate an amphibious assault force. When this war eventually ends, military academies worldwide will teach Ukrainian naval tactics, as the moment asymmetric warfare definitively proved that innovation beats numbers, that desperation breeds genius, and that the future belongs to whoever adapts fastest. Russia's Black Sea Fleet didn't just lose to Ukraine, it lost the future of warfare itself. And that future arrived courtesy of Ukrainian engineers working in garages under daily bombardment, building drone boats from jet ski parts and off-the-shelf electronics, proving that you don't need a navy to win a naval war. You just need to be smarter than your enemy. Thanks for watching. Now, if you want to learn more about how Russia's nuclear submarines aren't all they're chalked up to be, check out this video. And for more analyses and news on the war and global geopolitics, subscribe to The Military Show.